I am just going to try and give a slightly clearer exposition of my path as it stands. My dog will allow that, that is, and bring in some of the things that really interest me and that I feel really come into the work that I am trying to do. And so I'll be working from notes here, so please forgive the slightly stop-start nature of the video. Essentially, there are, I think, about 4 parts to my path at present, though they are all interrelated as far as I'm concerned. One part is the Satanism, and this for me is probably the most earthy and material part of my path. That's not to say it's not spiritual, because Satanism is a spirituality, and I hope that that will become kind of clearer as I go on in the video. Satan is the lord of this world, as is Saturn, and I don't think that it matters how you approach this entity or this principle, whether you call it Satan or you call it Saturn, Shaitan, whatever. But I personally think that approaching this as Satan and Shaitan is valid and brings in some important things to it. Primarily because while this is a principle which deals with this world and which deals with our incarnation, I think it's important to recognize the importance of individuality in this process and the arising of individuality, and also the power of negation which we have as human beings. And in fact, in a sense, those two things, the arising of individuality and the power of negation, very much characterize embodiment. And in a sense, they're the essence of embodiment, I think. So that's one thing, and I've done other videos on my view of Satanism here, though it is constantly evolving. Now, the second part of the path, which goes back a very long way for me, back into my late teens, is Thelema. There's a very good overlap with Satanism as far as I'm concerned, in that Crowley considered the Book of the Law to have been transmitted to him by a being that he called Aiwass, and who he equated with Satan, Shaitan, and Set. So I honestly consider that Thelema has a very strong satanic element to it, and it's a key one. So I think that's very important. The thelemic part of my path you could call the fiery part, maybe, but it is the sort of it has been in a lot of ways the driving impetus behind my path over all these years recently, really, even if that's been dormant at times, it basically always comes back. And I think the equating of Aiwass with Shaitan, I think puts it in a clear satanic stream, and it also puts Satanism within a thelemic stream in a sense. At least I believe so in principle. Now, Thelema posited a number of ages or aeons, and Thelema and the Book of the Law declared the inauguration of the Aeon of Horus, which was the Aeon of the Crowned and Conquering Child, which came after the Aeon of Osiris, which is the Aeon in which we saw the rise of Christianity and Islam, and of these very dominant monotheist spiritualities and religions. The Aeon of Horus, by in distinction to that, was and is one which sees a great deal of destruction, because there is a great deal need to break down the structures of the old so that the new can come in. And so Horus the child emerges from this, but it can only emerge from the destruction. So there is a very strong destructive element to the Aeon of Horus. Essential to this also is the idea of the true will and of the focus on the individual. So we get this focus of individuality, negation or destruction, and again, so we get this essentially satanic principle coming through the Aeon of Horus. And Crowley himself considered that Set was very important in driving this age. Now, that continues to be a really important kind of fulcrum to my path, and I think, I hope you could see from what I've said, that these two forms of the Satanism and Thelema actually dovetail very clearly, or well, more than dovetail really. They're essentially the same thing. Though Thelema is a very clear exposition of something, and I think that makes it tremendously valuable. Certainly tremendously valuable to me, and it's, I think, why that has been the driving force of my spirituality over, well, 40 years basically. So that's one lot, or two in one, in terms of parts of my path. The third part, I would say, I identify with the Mart current and Mart magic. Now, just as we had the Aeon of Horus arising and superseding the Aeon of Osiris, which originally superseded the Aeon of Isis, so it's posited that after the Aeon of Horus there would come the Aeon of Mart, who is in a sense the daughter to Horus's son. And this is an Aeon of truth. It's an Aeon of truth and justice and realization. Now, the Aeon of Mart is something which has, by some people, been recognized or posited to run concurrently with the Aeon of Horus, because the Aeon of Mart is outside of time, and so it can be effectively be accessed from any point within time. And so just as the Aeon of Horus is breaking things down and bringing individuality to the fore and the power to negate to the fore, the Aeon of Mart is simultaneously there, which gives it another dimension to things. I think this is very important. It's certainly something I need to look into more. In more modern times, the Aeon of Mart was explored by a magician called Nima in Cincinnati, and she wrote a book called Mart Magic, which is a very fine manual of self-initiation. Nema crops up in Kenneth Grant's work, as do a number of other people who are relevant here. The Aeon of Mart was first declared by a man called Charles Stanfield Jones, or Frater Ached, in 1948. Charles Stanfield Jones was what Crowley considered to be his magical son, the result of the attempt to form a moonchild with him, and I think it was a Scarlet Woman called Sister Hilarion. And he recognized Charles Stanfield Jones as his magical child, not because he was born after this event, but because, in a sense, he was spiritually reborn after this event. He claimed to have crossed the abyss in Kabbalistic terms and attained the grade of Magister Templi, which is a kind of death and rebirth. So, Charles Stanfield Jones was Crowley's magical baby in that sense. And Charles Stanfield Jones declared the Aeon of Mart as inaugurated in 1948. It seems to the next be picked up in a major way by Nema, who received a you could say a channel document. I guess you could say it was anyway. It was a sort of reveal document which she received from a being that she termed Natan, who was a future collective consciousness of humanity. I think Nema's work is very important, and I actually believe this is quite key. I think Nema recognized, as many of her generation did, that humanity was in quite a fix, really, in terms of the mess we were making of things. Natan actually communicated back from the future to Nema, and the essence of this was that Natan was a future collective consciousness, pretty much one of the possible futures where we had actually come through. But the important thing to realize about this is that this collective consciousness is a collective aware consciousness which doesn't abrogate individuality. We tend to think of collective consciousness as being almost like herd instinct or mob mentality or collectivism, and that's not what this is at all. This is quite different to that. Realized individuality is an absolute necessity for this to actually occur, and so you can see that this actually has to occur in the context of Thelema, and in fact it is a Thelemic teaching and a Thelemic stream, and it's sometimes referred to as the double current, the 93 current and the 696 current. And I think what's very clear about this is that the whole thing of the Aeon of Mart is very, very Aquarian. And this whole sense of this collective consciousness of humanity, which is sort of telepathic and intuitive and quite extraordinary to our present worldview. This is a very Aquarian concept. It's a very Aquarian realization. And I think this is important. I think this is really important, and is one of the works that we potentially have, which is to actually bring this about. But again, it has to occur in the context of full individualization. So you don't get around that bit. There isn't a shortcut to just flip out into Mart consciousness. That doesn't happen. So I think that's all very interesting. So that would be the third part of what I would see as as where my path is coming through. Now, another very Aquarian figure picked up by Kenneth Grant was a gentleman called Michael Bertio, who I rate very highly, and who I look upon with great affection. I think he's a tremendously kind and compassionate man, and I really like his teachings. Now, Michael Bertio is involved in voodoo, and he has streams of thelema, and I believe of also the Mart current in his work. He deals a great deal in spiritism and working with spirits and energies, and he deals a great deal in the qualities of water, water in the spirit world, free of material limitations, and in dealing with this as a source of harmony as well, you know, something that we can actually merge with in various ways. I think that fits perfectly with the Mart current, but it's from a very watery perspective, whereas Nima's material seems far more airy in a sense, and I think they're very interesting complementary perspectives. I think in this respect, it's very good to remember that Aquarius is the water bearer, but this will be beyond terrestrial water. So I find this quite fascinating, you know, and I think it actually equates also with the sense of the waters of space. Another thing is both Nima and Michael Bertio deal with communication with the future, which I think is also really fascinating and really important. This dealing with time and this dealing with the future. So I think that is important. There's also a connection here with me for the idea of water consciousness as described by the esotericist Richard Gardner. Now, while you could traditionally connect water consciousness with the moon, kind of for fairly obvious reasons, I feel it is actually very connected to bodies much further out in the solar system, beyond Pluto, in the Kuiper Belt and the Oort cloud. And for me, Sedna comes to mind here, and Sedna's symbolism actually certainly does reflect something here. But I think this is all really interesting, yeah. So Sedna is a body which is very far out, and its orbital period is very, very long indeed. It's thousands of years, you know, whereas Pluto is just a few hundred. So it's a whole different scale of things, and I think looking back to this scale of things is important in understanding our connection with the cosmos in this way. Again, you need individualization to do this. So this is where thelema comes in, and it's where Satanism comes in too, for me. Now, in fact, both Michael Bertio and Kenneth Grant refer to trans-Yugothian influences, bringing in some, you know, Lovecraftian imagery, and now Yugoth could be another name for Pluto, or it could be a name for a planet beyond Pluto. But I think again, this again points towards this Aquarian influence, which goes really far deep into space, but which is still connected with our solar system. And I think this is very important stuff as far as I'm concerned. I think there's a lot of work here. I think there is a lot of work here. I think it's very exciting, and I think it's also available, in fact. I particularly think that Uranus going into Taurus will bring about and will bring to prominence certain Martian issues, probably especially to do with our relationship to other forms of life, both on this planet and even beyond. Well, yes, I think so, and also with our ecological crisis as well. I think those are Martian issues, because a lot of our predicament comes down to the fact that we have not been able to attain harmonious collective awareness, and we can't do that because we do not individuate properly, which means that we can't actually engage in anything collectively without it basically succumbing to unconsciousness. And so we get mob mentality, we get these ridiculous things playing out. It doesn't need to be that way, but it can only be that way if we don't reach true individuality and seek to and hopefully succeed in getting much closer to our true will and doing it. So for me, these are things that we need. We need these because we're way too destructive otherwise. We're way too destructive, and we needn't be. I also think that the Trans-Yugothian influences will become more aligned and resonant as Pluto reaches Aquarius, and it will be doing that sort of in and out of Aquarius in 2023, and finally will go into Aquarius in 2024. And I think that will bring quite a lot of stuff through. It will bring a lot of resonances. I won't even talk about possible crises, but it would bring a lot of availability of certain things for work in terms of this kind of magic. And all of this happens against the backdrop of Neptune being in Pisces, which I think is a great opportunity, which has been with us for quite some time. I think that Neptune in Pisces is opening up the possibility, not automatically, but it's opening up the possibility, if people really want to plug into it, of a much more direct and conscious access to the spirit world and to the astral. But we've actually had a kind of fake version of it with Neptune and Aquarius, seeing things like technology and mass communications and the internet and all these sorts of things, which of course have proved to be completely clunky and soaked in all sorts of glamour, which has worn off now. Neptune in Pisces is oddly unglamorous. It's just the raw stuff. And this actually gives the possibility of that real limitless thing, if you're actually prepared to find the connection with it and to move off into that ocean. So it's there, and there's a lot of things happening, and I think there's a lot of potential for very interesting work to take place and to be done by people who feel called to it. Anyway, I hope that made some sense, and I hope you enjoyed it, and that's it for now.